For those of you who have just joined, there should be a trivia poll up on your screen. Go ahead and try and answer these questions. And we'll begin in a couple minutes here. Okay, we're going to go ahead and end the poll.
Question number 1, in what year were the first Africans brought to American shores? The answer is the first one, 1619. In 1619, stolen by Portuguese slave traders, kidnapped by English pirates, enslaved people first arrived in colonial Virginia. This marked the origins of U.S. slavery. Second question, Dr. Carter G. Woodson originated what we now call Black History Month. The answer is true. Black History Month began in 1926 as Negro History Week in an effort to increase awareness about the contributions of African Americans in the U.S. 50 years later, in 1976, the federal government acknowledged the expansion of Black History Week, ultimately changed from Negro History Week to Black History Month. And question number 3, the last one, what was the first historically Black college in America? The answer is 3, Cheney University in Cheney, Pennsylvania, was founded as the African Institute in February 1837. Thank you all for participating. And I'll turn it over to Keith.
Good afternoon. It is so nice to see so many of you on the session today. We are excited to present to you as a part of the Black History Month celebration for ANR, a glimpse of the Black experience in the United States, and to have you take a journey with us over the next month and get a chance to look at the multi-dimensionality of what it means to be a Black person in the United States. So we're very excited. So many of you have joined us this afternoon for our inaugural event with ANR celebrating Black History Month. Thank you to our leadership for providing the space and the platform for us to be able to offer this to you, our colleagues, and that we hope that as a result of your participation, you will bring something to this conversation that we are starting around the Black experience and share that experience throughout your time with ANR. Thank you again very much on behalf of the Planning Committee, Esther and Lachey. Thank you so much for everything that you've done to bring this to this point. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our leader, Glenda. If you're on, it is on you. Thank you so much again. Thank you very much.
Hey, Keith, thank you so much. That is great. I'm really excited about today's program. So first of all, just a really big welcome to our first UC ANR Black History Month event, but not our last. In addition to more this month, we're hoping to make this a tradition well into the future. I do want to say many thanks to the group of employees who volunteered their time to make this program happen. I think most of you know a lot of work goes into putting together these kind of programs. As you're going to learn this month, Black Californians have played many significant roles throughout US history, as well as in UC's growth and our many accomplishments. Workers, scholars, artists, and activists who have propelled the University of California and the world forward. But there's a lot of work that remains to be done to achieve ideals of equality, inclusion, and justice. As you enjoy the events we've got going on this month, and I hope they spark your interest in even more information, check out other stories and histories on University of California's 150th year timeline. There's a lot of great stories and photographs there about how Black Americans affected the growth of UC. You can also find a lot of stuff on our social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc., as the entire system celebrates Black History Month, and hear voices of our students, our alumni, our staff, and our faculty from across the system as they share visions for the future, as well as work going on today. So without further ado, let me turn it back to you folks, because I am really excited today to hear from our wonderful keynote speaker, Sonia Lewis.
Thank you, Glenda. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Sonia. As soon as I'm finished with her introduction, she will begin her presentation. Sonia Lewis is a California native. Her educational background includes degrees from Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, in history and psychology, a secondary teaching credential in social studies, and a master's degree in education from San Francisco State University. After spending nearly 20 years in the traditional classroom teaching history and social studies, and managing a small magnet program, she founded Ascribe Educational Consulting. Their focus has always been geared towards educational and racial equity and also resource distribution. Since 2009, Ascribe Educational Consulting has centered the development of programs and writing of curriculum for marginalized and vulnerable student populations. In addition, her work involves speaking and training around topics of equity, race relations, and social justice. When she is not working, you will find her loving and nurturing and advocating for 6 boys, 7 bonus children, and 2 granddaughters. Please join me in welcoming Sonia Lewis.
Thank you for that welcoming introduction, Lachey. I appreciate it. And thank you for all of those with UC ANR who have brought this program to fruition, right? I am going to start our presentation. I hope that this is not the last and it is the beginning and that we kick this off with a bang. I come to you in the spirit of my ancestors. So today I am the griot, the one who holds the history and tells the story. It's important to connect the past to the present so that truth can prevail. We're going to talk about big elephants like stolen bodies and colonized land. What would America be, ask yourself, if it had not been for Black and Indigenous people? Because there's this denial of white supremacy, racism, and privilege. Today, last year specifically, there's been this huge trend to now acknowledge the harm of oppression. And in making acknowledgements, we have to be committed to change. And that commitment to change hopefully embraces an understanding of shared language and values. And then finally, that's the only way, in my opinion, for an anti-racist society to even exist. So let us journey down a road of racial restoration, community healing, and hopefully reparations. This Black history discussion is about the Black lived experience and how it is fundamentally and foundationally what makes America the dream worthy to be shared in history books. But before we dive in, I want to invite you to feel your breath. It is so super important to ground and acknowledge who we are and where we are, that we have power to shape outcomes and expectations. Breath is life, so is land and water. So take a deep breath in with me. And exhale. Recognize that we are about to cover some heavy material that may evoke or trigger past experiences. Release all of your anxieties and fears. Replace it with changed energy. It is our collective energy, collective efforts that are great possibilities for equity and humanity in the future. Breathe in and exhale. American colonizers brought enslaved Africans, not slaves, to this land. They were met by indigenous groups throughout all of the Americas. We acknowledge the Nisenan, the Maidu, the Patwin, the Wintu, the Miwok, and the Miwok people who are still amongst us today. This was their land before colonization. Like the Africans, indigenous people were also stolen, indoctrinated, and conditioned, and killed off in large numbers. We call that genocide. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Along with acknowledging the land, we have to recognize this country wouldn't be what it is had it not been for those stolen Black bodies who built and fed this country. Not by choice, the African American has lost its connection with Africa, language, religion, culture, rituals. As well, this disconnect is coupled with not fully having the benefits of what it means to be American. That is enslavement. So who am I? I consider myself a California kid. Oftentimes I describe myself as an Oakland chick. I grew up in very urban communities, but I also have very deep, rich roots to the Midwest and South. My family can trace this ancestry back to slave plantations in North Carolina. You already heard that I'm a proud, proud, proud graduate of the #1 HBCU in the country, Spelman College. And I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm an educator, community activist, and entrepreneur. I see you, Keith. In my Whitney Houston voice, I just have to say, I believe that the children are the future. And if it were not for my 7-year-old self who constantly is reminding me to challenge systems, she at 7 said that she wasn't going to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And she said that because she didn't see liberty and justice for people who looked like me, my family, and my community. So I've always been imagining a world where equity and humanity matters. And so that's my job today, is I am just determined to. And then I come to you unapologetic about and authentic and being the blackity black person that I am, and that February isn't the blackest month of the year. We are the lived experience, right? All of these images that you see here, people you may recognize and some you may learn about over this month. It doesn't matter, this is the reality. It doesn't matter how hard we try sometimes, how many degrees we attain, what our income status is, or the privilege that we have in proximities to whiteness. The system still can't save Black folks from structural, institutional, and systemic racism, because the system was designed to diminish and silence us, and it has been working. And so the important thing of lifting and centering the Black lived experience is to highlight the fact that there's the receivement gap, not an achievement gap. We've proved for over 400 years that we can achieve when the circumstances are just right, when the equations are just right, right? So the system is intended to hinder the success and thrivability, and that has been taking place for over 400 years. I also come to you in honoring the legacy of the Pan-African flag, the red for the blood that has shed, the green for the land we've toiled, the black for the bodies that have lived, and the yellow for the rising of the sun. With each day, there's a new opportunity for equity. Our survivals are reflective of the African diaspora because we're connected by a global struggle. So what is my work? What do I do on a regular basis? I do these 3 things. We are anti-racist impact activists. That is the core of my work. 2, because I've been reimagining a world that it is in just all equity, right, for everyone. I believe that humanity has to supersede the established norms and policies that we've all relied on, because literally and figuratively, it has been killing marginalized people, specifically Black people. And at the core of this work, I have taken on the responsibility of curating safe space, brave space for conversations about race, because it's not easy to have. This isn't about blame or shame. This is about acknowledging and honoring. And so one song that comes to mind when I think about this work is Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. If you don't know me by now, you will never, ever, ever know me. And my reference to that song is you will never understand and know the Black lived experience. So I dedicate this to the struggle to survive. And I say the names of Emmett Till and George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. So many countless others. These are several pictures of myself as the former chapter lead with Black Lives Matter Sacramento. And these are protests, organized activism, where we have brought attention to the Black lived experience and the inequities that oftentimes, this is Golden One Arena, this is part of a shutdown of the I-5 freeway. This is in front of the DA's office as we continue to ask the DA come out with a resolution in regards to the Stephon Clark case. But this was an opportunity for the Black community to come together and say that enough is enough. And so we have to question. I do, in my short 50 years of life, I still question, do Black lives matter? And so if I'm still questioning that as a Black woman, I surely know that the question still exists in many people's minds when we see experiences like what transpired on January 6th at our state capitol. we can no longer pretend not to know, because we know that denying reality is causing people to go crazy. And so what is this thing that we're denying? We're denying white supremacy. And Frances Lee Ansley defines white supremacy as a political and economic and cultural system in which whites overwhelmingly control power and material resources, conscious and unconscious ideas of white superiority and entitlement, and widespread and relations with white dominance and non-white subordination are daily reenactments across a broad array of institutions and social settings. So it was last year, right, that our reality changed, and we now live in this new reality. I call it the collision of pandemics, because racism has been there like for forever. As long as my life, I can think about stories that my parents have told and stories that my grandparents have told. Racism has always existed, right? But we're now in a collision with pandemics, which is the coronavirus. And so how is that changing the dynamics? I say that the coronavirus has opened up, it's like pulled back that Band-Aid that is all worn and tattered off of that wound that just won't heal. So together, these pandemics have prompted this new trend, where people are acknowledging the anti-Blackness and racism that impacts Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. And to take it a step further, what people are doing, and I'm seeing in community, is that not just individuals, but organizations are making big efforts in regards to public statements, right? They are getting to work at strategic plans of implementation that include the redress of leadership and representation, because we have to tackle the policies so that they reflect an anti-racist approach. And then there are those who are still unwilling to see that change is necessary. Let me offer those of you who are not recognizing in this moment the need for change. Silence can be very violent, and it's necessary to have this conduit for change happen now. So I want to show this clip really quick. And this clip by D-Ray, who's a former activist with the Black Lives Movement. We have to understand whiteness.
And white supremacy.
And white supremacy is a system that says that white people are the norm, are normative, are worth more, and are valued at the expense of others. And we think about a culture that idea spawns, that is whiteness. And then we think about white people as people who benefit from the system of white supremacy, whether they participate in it actively or not. And part of this work is about helping people understand that allies and accomplices are people who understand the work. They understand that there's an issue. And understanding white privilege says that I get that I participate in a dominant culture and I benefit from a system of white supremacy, whether I've done something supremacist or not. And that is a personal recognition. We want people to take that personal recognition a step further and say, what are the systemic things that actually create this privilege in the first place? And we want them to fight at that level. That's what accomplices do. But I wanted to, I tweet a lot this phrase, watch whiteness work.
So if you were to just summarize in a sentence, what is your message to the white community and white people?
White people got to organize themselves, have to join solidarity work with people of color, and have to use personal experiences to think about how systems allow privilege to manifest at the personal level.
And so we have personal, individual responsibility, right?
What's the difference between white?
And so inmate having that personal responsibility. I found this wonderful poem that just resonated so much with this topic, because what would happen if we call things by their proper names?
The saying goes, sticks and stones may break your bones. The saying goes, words can never hurt you. But I want to talk about the density of language, or how reality can be obscured by a sentence, or how a sentence can be obscured by the color of your skin. Do you see how easy it is to manipulate humanity? I want to talk about foundations. 39 people gathered to codify the United States. 11 of those 39 people owned slaves. What happens when we call them founding fathers instead of colonizers? I want to talk about shifting trends in representation and the cost to indigenous people who still protect the land. I want to talk about the emotional impact of Black trauma in media, but the rent is due, and Black Lives Matter is trending again. I want to talk about traditions, how much we focus on the minstrel show performance, but not the people who tarred themselves and took the stage and wrote the script and filled the stands. Do you see how dangerous it is to disappear wrongdoing when those in control of the narrative don't have to take responsibility for their actions? For example, you say transatlantic slave trade, you say triangular, and immediately the mind starts focusing on the directions of the boats and not the stolen histories decaying below the deck. See how quickly the water runs red. Unnaming is a process of manipulation. For example, if I call a human a prisoner, immediately you stop questioning the legitimacy of the cage. Hocus pocus. Proof goes contact with the outside world. What happens when we call the Women's March a protest, and the protest a riot, and the riot a lawless place? Do you see how the sex worker goes missing in the space between legislation and false morality? Do you see Black trans women leading movements and being snatched from the face of them? What happens when grieving Black folks are labeled looters, when mobs of white people are not labeled patriots, even though they are doing the most American thing? When we call it police brutality instead of genocide, when we call them accusers instead of survivors, when patriarchy makes itself small enough to sit between your teeth, what happens? When words like revolution and abolition are more forbidden than words like lethal injection or life without the possibility. And maybe this is just all what happens when we've decided the truth is too large to fit in our mouths. And maybe it's less about who's at the table, but more about questioning why the table exists. And I don't have the answers, but I invite you to a moment of reflection, to interrogate assumptions you've digested without flinching, manufactured lies you've repeated without blinking. I invite you to imagine a reality, a moment, a space where oppressed people don't ask for permission, don't dress up in palatable renditions of themselves, and still have all the resources needed to tell their own stories, to call things by their proper names.
That poem just resonates with me. And in particular, there's a line in the poem. There's a line in the poem where oppressed people don't have to ask for permission. Don't have to ask for permission to show up in our unprocessed hair. Don't have to ask for permission to dress a certain way. Don't have to ask for permission to speak a certain way, right? So I give you this first tip: do your homework. Don't label Black, Indigenous, and other people of color with what you don't know. It's not fair if you want to take a screenshot here, but I trust anything by Robin DiAngelo, Jane Elliott, and Tim Wise. They are like at the top of the spectrum when it comes to white activists and educators when it comes to race relations, right? We have to acknowledge the harm. We cannot live any longer in this sugar-coated, pink, fuzzy feeling kind of existence with our blinders on. Oppression does not feel good to the oppressed, and that's why we continue to resist. When we talk about the dominant group versus the marginalized group, it's the dominant group who sets the social rituals, right? The ridicule comes from the dominant group, the harassment and the control. The marginalized group continues to shrink. But what it also impacts is the health of the marginalized group, the mental health, the social health, the physical health. When those things are impacted, we are talking about our autonomy is impacted, control is impacted, and the sense of who we are as individuals. But the most important thing that's taken away from people who are marginalized is their agency, the right to choose, the ability to participate and not feel ostracized in the process. Dr. Joy DeGruy, one of my favorite authors and researchers, wrote a book, The Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, Slavery Placing Stress, right? We are familiar with this post-PTSD and how there are risk factors that are constantly being thrown at our bodies. And as trauma continues and early in life, that there are some things that will just manifest because we've experienced trauma. Well, I assert to you today, and Dr. Joy DeGruy has written a huge amount of work around the decoding of DNA for the Black lived experience, in that I know the feelings of my mother's oppression and my grandmother's oppression and her mother's oppression. It is in my DNA. And we're doing all of this in a very stressful position while trying to identify ourselves as an individual and in groups, right? Because we have these cultural norms here. What is our ethnicity? Someone's always asking us to check a box. What are the system factors that are causing us to shape who we are as individuals? What is the relations between people in community? What are our personal contextual factors, like our genetics, right? What does that DNA say about us? The griot is a family in Africa that passes down the tradition. You're born into a griot family, just like you're born into a shoemaker's family, just like you're born into a doctor's family. And then all of that is coupled with the fact that we have all of these isms that continue to constrain and shrink and dehumanize those who are of the marginalized group. And so I am asking for people to start thinking about strategies, right? Strategies for racial healing. We have to relearn what history of racism is. We have to grieve it. We have to name it when we see it. We have to raise our racial consciousness. We have to catch ourselves in the flow of racism. Like when it's actually happening, what are you doing about it? We have to understand our relationships and how racism plays a part in that. We have to reclaim our whole racial selves. And if you are an ally, be a racial ally. Engage in collective healing. Know your racial identity, because there's no one in this country that is not an immigrant. And then explore what these internalized, how internalized racism impacts people. So we all enter this conversation at various levels of understanding and being. Very different and unique. We all have different levels of privilege and power, but there's one group, first and foremost, that the racialized American society has deemed the one, right? White, heterosexual, married, Christian, English-speaking, able-bodied, American-born males, any age. And it doesn't matter if they're rich or educated, or if they came from a poor background, or if they live in a state like California, which is the 5th largest economy in the world. He is still preferred. He still has privilege. So when we're talking about racism, we just have to watch out for the 3 big ones that we don't control as individuals: structural, institutional, and systemic, right? Those came into being from the founding fathers' words that these people would be lifted and these people wouldn't. But they show up in every system that we all rely upon for survival: housing, education, employment, ability to vote, and access to healthcare. So this is a quick video just on the understanding the nuances and the differences between structural, institutional, and systemic racism, because it's important to know the difference.
Structural, institutional, and systemic racism broadly refer to the system of structures that have procedures or processes that disadvantage racial minorities, and particularly Black people. It refers to the rules, practices, and customs once rooted in law with residual effects that reverberate throughout society, each with their own nuances. A good example of systemic racism is redlining, a system once used by banks and the real estate industry that literally outlined the neighborhoods where people of color lived in red ink. If you lived inside of the red lines, loans were considered risky and banks were less likely to give loans or even invest. The practice was banned in 1968, but the impacts live on, preventing Black families from amassing wealth at the same rate as their white neighbors on the other side of that red line. Need proof? According to the Federal Reserve, the net worth of a typical white family is $171,000. That's 10 times greater than that of a Black family. Homes in black neighborhoods are generally and historically worth less than white homes because the developers and businesses that make a neighborhood, well, a neighborhood, are less likely to be there. That means the tax base is lower too, which has a trickle-down effect. Less tax dollars for schools means fewer kindergarten classes, fewer qualified teachers, fewer AP classes. That leads to lower graduation rates from high school and even fewer graduates from college. This is in part caused by the school-to-prison pipeline that disproportionately impacts people of color. Institutional racism is more narrowly defined as the overt and covert forces blocking people of color from accessing the same opportunities as white people. Many of these children may benefit from additional educational and counseling services. Instead of getting the help they need, they're isolated, punished, or incarcerated. Once you have a criminal record, it invades all aspects of your life. Getting everything from a job to an apartment becomes that more difficult. Many people believe their communities are over-policed, presumed to be overly dangerous. But consider this. Black and brown people account for 30% of the U.S. population, but account for 43% of people killed by police and more than half of the incarcerated population. Institutional racism goes beyond just serving time. Something as simple as hair can be used to discriminate. Rules at school and the workplace that don't allow for dreadlocks, cornrows, and braids, they discriminate and don't take into consideration hair texture and singles out people based on their physical traits, creating rules where rules aren't needed, rules that control people of color. So, who gets to make all of these rules in society? Since America was colonized, it's been white people who've made these rules. First with slavery, then Jim Crow laws, and separate but equal rules, and even creating limits on who can immigrate into the country. The term given to define that power, white privilege. It refers to whites' historical and contemporary advantages in access to quality education, decent jobs, a livable wage, home ownership, retirement benefits, and wealth, regardless of socioeconomic status.
So that gives us a very clear definition of the three varying definitions when we're talking about racism, right? And so I asked this question because I always, when I'm working with an organization, I go and I find out what that organization is about and what are the foundations that they stand on. So I say, if this is the mission of the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources, how were you then, because your mission is to connect Californians to the university, lead a way of science-based solutions, provide information, share research, address local concerns as a part of the community, invite the participation of concerned stakeholders and facilitate problem solving, right? So if this is your mission, then I question, where do you stand on and what have you done about Black representation when it comes to students and faculty, Black Lives Matter and police state sanctioned violence? What are your thoughts and solutions when it comes to the Flint water crisis, the prison industrial complex and the prison to school pipeline, gender equity, right? Unhoused populations and poverty, because we know that data can be collected in regards to who's successful in this country if there's no generational wealth. Mental health and drug addiction, farm workers' rights. We are in the Valley of California, so we are impacted by the agriculture here. What also comes to mind is the theft of gold, Black miners with Negro Bar over in Folsom, California, and the closure of Black towns like Allensworth, California. What happens when refineries are in disenfranchised communities? And then, have you recommended reparations like 40 acres and a mule, which was that lie that we were told we were going to receive? I mean, that's, to me, if we're speaking about agriculture and resources. If I tell you that Black people collectively are extremely angry and rightfully so, how have you and how would you respond? I recently posted on my Facebook page, dear white people, even if you aren't racist, you benefit from racism. And one person who I very much value in community, who I thought was an ally, really went bananas and was like, you can't say all white people. And I invited her, I said, please go back and read the post, because it says, dear white people, even if you aren't racist, you still benefit from racism. And so I've come to the conclusion, and as I set my intentions for 2021, I was in December thinking about things that are done in 2020, right? Because we were so at angst with how 2020 played out. And so allyship is dead, in my opinion. It officially died in 2020 because allies get an opportunity to go back to their privilege. They put up a couple of hashtags, they throw some dollars at a cause, but when it's time to really show up and do it on their own initiative, they don't. And so what kind of ally have you been is the question. Actively opposing or actively engaged? And you can see here the spectrum is extremely wide. But when we think about, or Dr. Addie, who's a friend of mine, wrote this piece on the 4 types of Black people. And I'm not going to read the entire article, but in this paragraph, she says, as a woman identified as Black in the United States, my breath is constantly caught between the scream of rage and a scream of terror. Like that terror and that rage is rooted in the unpredictable natures of those identified as white. Our spirits remember lynching parties, right? Our bodies remember plantation beatings. They remember it. It's in our DNA. And so she identified 4 types of white people: the racist. I don't have energy and time for, the racist. They might not ever change their minds. But the most dangerous, in my opinion, is the apologist. The apologist wants to police everything you do and say, and tone check you with everything you say, right? And then there's the ally, which we've already defined. But my favorite in community when I'm doing activist work is the abolitionist, because the abolitionists recognize that the policy is skewed, that the procedures are not fair. And so if I am your Black friend, please don't ask me to educate you on this. And I want to relate this to children, because if Black children are continually adultified and experiencing racism, white children can learn about it. And so there's no age that's appropriate. All ages can have this conversation. So we have to do better with embracing what I called shared values and language. And I'm not going to read these terms, right? Because we should be familiar with them. But the ones in red are what I consider the no-no zone. Green are the ones in the middle. We're community indicating where we are. We're taking barometer checks. And then yellow is where we want to be, like contracting equity, racial equity. I find myself constantly criticizing politicians, even those who are progressive and quote unquote woke, because oftentimes we see politics as very performative, and we want to get out of that performative and actually get into the sacrifices we can make for those who are less fortunate in community. How do our shared values impact all of that? It fosters a sense of understanding, connection, commonality, and relationship. Where are we having these conversations and being able to collaborate and create is the question. Ask yourself, what are the impacts of race and the white normative? You see agriculture and natural resources. What policies, programs, practices, and budget decisions really and truly lack equity? What are the intended results in your community and the outcomes within your organization that can leverage more equity? And then identify the what's and the who's who would be impacted by proposed change. We see this everywhere, but my question to you is, have you seen this at UC ANR? Right? The racial injustice, the microaggressions, the gaslighting, the racial harassment, right? And centering of self instead of lifting the needs of the most marginalized. My tip number 2 is to react calmly, because everyday racism can be handled by ordinary people. If you are just conveying that you don't approve of a person's behavior or the words they use, letting folks know that my feelings feel this way because you did this, don't get triggered and let your power get taken away from you, and use that age-old, if you have to, compliment them. Thank you for listening, but that was racist. Research has found that speaking up is good for all, the offender, the victim, and the bystander. It connects us all to belonging and humanity. Tip number 3, how to handle being called a racist, right? Get over it. Get over yourself. Like, shut up and listen. And I know that sounds very abrupt, but sometimes we have to be silent in moments and listen. Settle down and don't make the moment about you. Don't run to your comfort zones, because it's so easy to go and call the police when we are called the racist, and we want to call someone to come in and protect us. Reflect and learn. Have a discussion with the person that you offended, and then hopefully the experience will cause you to change. One of my favorite books that I keep referencing in talks that I've been giving around community is from Ibram X. Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And he says, it is a claim that signifies neutrality. Like, you can't say that you're not racist anymore. Being anti-racist means that you're actively doing things. The last line there, the claim of the not racist neutrality is a mask for racism. And so I welcome you to sit in that for a moment. The claim of the not racist is a mask for racism. In conclusion, I task you with this. Define your end game. What are those outcomes that UC ANR can identify within the system of power and begin to shift for others, those who are most marginalized? Do it for every Black boy and child born into this world who has failed to be seen. And so I leave you with this. This is a picture here of my family and the last picture that we took as a family. And I am the mother of 6 Black boys, and I have bonus children and grandchildren. And I, on a constant basis, am trying to remind them that they are Black enough.
Black is urban and rural,
wealthy and poor,
mixed race, immigrants, and more, and more,
and more.
and more.
Black is resourcefulness. Furthermore, Black is flavor. Black is the ability to naturally take nothing and turn it into everything.
Black is global, Black is healing, Black is far-reaching, and Black will always be here.
Black is special, beautiful, and something I'm proud to be.
Black is fly.
Black is making a way out of no way.
Black is who I am, no matter what you think I should do or say or be.
Black is magic.
Black is a bougie Black debutante dating a boy her mama would never approve of.
Black is sisters navigating their relationship at a summer camp in Portland, Oregon.
Black is a power, a beauty passed down from generation to generation.
Black is 3 kids walking back from the community pool, talking about nothing and talking about everything.
There are countless ways to be Black because my Black
is Black enough.
So I thank you.
Black.
And let's open it up for some questions.
Yes, thank you, Sonia, for the talk, for the eye-opening talk and the hard stuff that you have shared with us. But I think all of us here are ready to, are prepared to take on what needs to be done, and we will get it done. So yes, we are open for questions. You can raise your hand, I will call your name, or you can put your questions in the chat. For everybody, for Sonia, and for Glenda, if you like. Thank you. Any questions? Just put your questions in the chat, and let us use this moment and take an opportunity to ask Sonia, because we might not have her for other days. Thank you.
Esther, someone's asking if Sonia's presentation can be made available to the group.
It can be. I shared it with the group, and it can be, yes.
Sonia, thank you. I'll make sure it's shared.
Okay.
There is someone saying, I'm curious because I don't know how much about this, but in California, are there any other links between prison labor and agricultural labor?
You know, we've been trying to diagnose the prison industrial complex, and I say diagnose because we know that there's some sickness that comes to the communities that are impacted. But we are looking specifically in the Central Valley and several of the prison institutions that are in the Central Valley and how it impacts those who are laboring in the field, like the farm workers. Our prisoners working in the field here in California, we have not been able to identify that, but I can give you another example of how our prison labor is used to fight fires here in California, and they are very skilled individuals. They should be able to come out and get a job within fire departments all over the country, and they're denied because of their criminal record. And so I think that that's very similar to the question that you're posing in regards to agriculture.
Thank you, Sonia. There is another question. Can you go back to the slides of if this is ANR's mission? I'd like to sit with that more.
I think it's slide 28, Sonia.
Oh,
right. No,
if here,
more. Yes.
If this is your mission.
Yes, if ANR's mission, if this is ANR's mission.
Yeah. And so these are the things that are, you know, wonderful and worth working towards, right? And then so we can counter that, not necessarily counter that, but challenge ourselves to do more to make sure that equity actually exists.
And someone else is asking, Sonia, do you have social media?
Yes, I do. And let me see if I have the page of ways that folks. Here I am. So Ascribe Educational Consulting, our email is there, our number, our Facebook page, IG, and Twitter, all of the things.
Thank you, Sonia. Someone else, if anyone on this call has ideas how to get others in ANR engaged in this learning?
Repeat the question.
I don't think it's for you, but someone was asking if anyone in this call has ideas of how to get other people in ANR engaged in this learning.
I think someone not in the chat began to speak, and I don't know who it was, but if you want to speak and ask your question, go ahead.
That was me. This is Ron. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So thank you very much for this. It was very, very enlightening. The conversation, the references, and just kind of gave me a good feeling that there's somebody else thinking and speaking the same as us, and the struggles that we currently have within UCANR. My question is how long do we accept the verbiage of we're working on it, and there's a goal for that, when every day all of us here are dealing with unfortunate bouts of racism and anti-exclusionary tactics, one of which I just had this morning. How long before we take action? How long should we continue to listen to our leadership tell us to wait and to hold still?
Yeah. It's a challenging one, right? Because we have what ANR's mission is, and I say that we don't wait any longer. I mean, I have to put on my activist hat, right? And my activist hat says that we've collected the data, we've done the research, we know that these things exist. And so how then can we organize in a impactful manner with the number of people that come together? Maybe there are statements that they are being made. Maybe there's a public meeting that is had. Maybe there's an opportunity to do write and opt-ed. There are several strategies. I will share one strategy with my days with BLM Sacramento, and I'm still an ally and still on the front lines of what it means to fight for social justice here in Sacramento. And we knew that the sheriff department was hosting all of law enforcement throughout the state of California for their annual conference. And so we looked up the data and statistics with respects to the number of Black bodies that were killed while unarmed in our state, and came to 187. And we bought 187 of those Halloween coffins, and we laid them in the middle of the street, right in front of the place that they were having their conference, when we knew that they were having lunch, right? And so they would be outside. It would be no way that they could miss us in the street. We also had wonderful allies and accomplices right with us. So we enlisted the assistance of the clergy, who were in their full, as if they were on a Sunday morning talking to their congregations, and they were linked up arm in arm as a barrier between law enforcement and us, the activists in the streets. And so sometimes it's in your face. Other times it is an opportunity to bring people to the table that aren't typically at the table. But organizing requires people. It requires people to be vulnerable and have courage enough to share what their experiences have been.
Let's say time check, we are out of time. And I will say we will collect all the questions in the chat, and then we will figure out if we can give answers to those questions, and we will share with the group. At this moment, I want to welcome John Fox to give a vote of thanks to our speakers and everybody who attended. Thank you.
Thanks, Esther. And yeah, I feel bad to feel like I'm cutting off the conversation. I do want to again thank Sonia for a great message, and I guess creating this brave conversation. And part of it, as she was introducing it, talked about how this is heavy material and it's not easy to have these conversations. And I know there are many of you within ANR that have been advocating that we create more of these spaces and make sure that these conversations are happening. And I think the way you presented it, Sonia, was amazing. So much information that you shared with us in such a short period of time, very effectively. I also want to thank Esther Masase, Lachey McGill, Keith Nathaniel. They were the planning committee for this event and for the Black History Month events that are coming up. The turnout today shows that there's absolute interest within ANR and having these conversations. And it exceeded my expectation about how many of you were involved. And I hope that you continue to join these conversations this month and going forward. And Esther also wanted to make sure we express special thanks to Nicodemus Ford and the Black and Allied Employees Group who helped support the planning for this. And I know that group has also been advocating to make sure these conversations are happening and to see how we can make ANR a less racist organization and how we fight racism within our own communities. So I guess, yeah, I just want to thank you all for doing it. And I do see that, there's momentum for change at ANR. And I know that, for many of you, it's not moving fast enough, and I recognize and understand that. But I think it's also through all of our collective efforts. It's not just waiting for one person to do something. I think, part of the message that Sonia shared was it's for all of us to step up and demand change and push for it in whatever role we're in the organization. So thank you all again for taking the time today.
Yes, thank you. And please join us for next week and the other 2 weeks. We will be having interesting conversations and probably will have time to ask our questions. But I think Kaylee, you are recording or you are copying the questions, the chat, so I can get the questions out of there, right? And thank you. Okay, this time I'll give it to Lachey. Sorry, Lachey.
I just wanted to say thanks again to Sonia and also the fellow members of the planning committee. This is a lot of work, but it's certainly worth it. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. We plan to send out a survey in the next couple days to solicit your feedback and recommendations. Thank you.
It was my honor. Thank you all.